Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais from a sweltering Ontario, Canada. We are having quite a good period of summer over the last few days, so that's a nice change to our normal wintry weather. As always, we have interesting guests, but first I must tell you this is episode 183 of the Yakking Show. And this is the show to enlighten you, to enable you, and to entertain you, to awaken you to new perspectives for the changing world we're living in. And the world is certainly changing rather rapidly at the moment. As I mentioned, we have interesting guests, and today is no exception. But Kathleen does a much better job of introducing guests than I do. So let's first welcome Kathleen Beauvais from Waterloo, Ontario. Hi, Kathleen. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you so much for that intro. And thank you all so very much for tuning into our show. We so appreciate you and we love reading your comments. So please keep those coming. And if anyone out there is interested in being a guest on our show, please don't hesitate to reach out to either Peter or myself. We'd love to hear from you. And as Peter mentioned, we do have another special guest with us today. His name is Karl Maier. Hello, Karl. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Peter. Excited to be here.
Excellent. Now, Karl, you are coming to us from Houston, Texas. I'm sure it's quite toasty warm there right now. But you are the founder of Abunden, which is a company that helps businesses build their management operating systems so that they can double their company's sales within 3 years. And we'll be interested in learning more about that in just a few minutes. But first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to develop a passion for helping entrepreneurs grow their business?
Absolutely. I've always been interested in organization, and businesses have been a great way to understand how people relate and organize themselves. And started in the corporate world, but my family twisted my arm to join the family business and got a whole new perspective on life that way. Saw some of the opportunities and challenges that my family's business went through, and worked with that company for a number of years before moving on and doing some entrepreneurial ventures myself, and later helping being part of management teams with a number of other companies, and just, getting to see kind of the human impact of these decisions, the employees, the owners, their families, and the successes and in some cases the failures it's very motivating how you can have an impact on people and see that impact.
Right. And just out of curiosity, what was the family's business?
It was an industrial distribution business, so industrial exciting products like valves and pipes and things like that.
Oh, interesting. Now, what is your typical client?
A typical client will be a company with, it could be a couple million, 5 million, 10 million of revenue that has some sort of challenge. Growing is usually the symptom that we see. Hey, I grew to this point, I grew to 3 million revenue, and then it just stopped. I've been flat for several years, and what's going on? I can't really put my finger on it. What used to work just doesn't seem to work anymore. That's the most common situation I run into. And my job is to kind of go in and do a triage. Let's see what there may be a number of issues, but let's focus on one or two that are key issues that can really move the needle, make things easier, less stressful, and hopefully eventually grow the sales, enable the growth of the sales of the company.
And I just want to throw this in again. Have you seen a common thread among companies when they come to you and they've plateaued and they haven't been able to increase their sales? Is there usually something in common with these companies?
Usually there are one or two things that are common across most of the companies. And one of them is really about delegation. If you've, over half of companies are started by salespeople and another big chunk by product people. And those are really important skills for starting a company, growing a company. But you get to a certain point and it's no longer about you selling or you doing product stuff. It's now about you managing an organization. And if you haven't been trained, you don't have the experience doing that, maybe you run into a couple bumps along the road.
Right. Oh, interesting point. Yeah,
Yeah,
delegation.
very good.
Mhm.
Now, during this and with the way you developed your own framework, which you call the Abunden Framework Business Operating System. So is this a sort of compilation of what you've been talking about so far? And can you expand on that? How does that work?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you are going to, so delegation, we're just talking about, that's a challenge. And, the instinct is, I'm going to tell you to do something and I'm going to expect that it gets done. Well, that's a great theory, doesn't always work that simply. And what we found, my experience in working with many companies over the years is there's a number of different pieces that really need to be in place to have a very, very high likelihood of when you tell somebody can work on this, that it actually gets done. And so that's what the Abunden Framework, and the Abunden Framework has been put into software that we help companies implement. And it's things like, let's have a short plan so that we can explain to our team where we're going. Sounds good. So
But to be clear, this isn't about micromanaging at all. This is just a framework.
Well, we hope not.
Right.
Yeah.
And micromanaging, is something we're trying to discourage. We're trying to pull people, that CEO, out of the day-to-day, instead of, when you've got a handful of people working for you, you should be in the details. You should know exactly what's going on in the company. When you've got 25 people, if you're trying to do that, you just, good luck. That's a lot of balls to keep up in the air at one time. So what we're trying to do in that situation is pull them out of the details. So if we're going to hand things off, if I'm going to say, tell my teenager to go drive the car, well, I might want to tell them where we're going. So that's the one-page business plan. And, and then let's establish roles. Okay, I'm going to sit over in the passenger seat and, not scream at you every time that, you change lanes. And so let's have an organizational chart. So we've got easy drag and drop organizational charts to help adapt as the organization, and management meetings. So we have ways to identify opportunities and challenges and have productive discussions about those. Supervisor tools, so that supervisors, when you're promoted to supervisor, how do you know what to do? Well, let's give them tools so they can show them what they're supposed to do, and then we can keep track of, are they actually doing it? And processes, some learning management, so we can train people effectively. So those are trying to give you a feel for the scope of the tools. And then we help them implement those. So it's not just handing you a book or handing you the software. Let's help you build the habits and make it fit to your team, not make your company fit into our system. How do we make our system fit into your company?
Right.
So follow on, which just occurred to me while you were talking. I've had a corporate background, a farming background, and my own business that was not farming, but spent a lot of time in farming over in Africa. And one of the phenomena that we noticed was the first generation could build a really successful farm, and farms had a lot of labor in Africa compared to here. I employed 180 people, for instance. So first generation builds a really successful farm, grows it, retires or dies, hands it over to the son, and at a rough estimate, 50% of those second generation people would take it further. The other 50% would drive it into the ground within 5 or 10 years. So are you called in to fix those type of problems in small and medium-sized businesses in the corporate world?
Absolutely. I remember one situation with they were selling trucks, large trucks. And like you say, the founder, started it from nothing and built it up. And by the time it got to, the point he was ready to retire, the son had been in the business for a number of years, but the owner had grown and just had this sixth sense. He'd been through it so many times that he could just say, oh, we need to work on collections. We need to, because he just had a feeling for what everything he'd been doing it for 30 years. The son, on the other hand, you know, had been given roles and projects, but really just didn't have that, you know, he hadn't built it up from nothing. And so what he needed was more processes and reports so that he could manage this larger organization. But the son, you know, walked in, had never been exposed to that type of background. The father had never, you know, operated that way. And yes, 3 years later, the father had been off, you know, enjoying life. The son had been working really hard, but called the father and said, hey, the bank's calling and we've got a big problem here. Father had to pledge all of his real estate just to keep the company going. Had to come back in and start working again and digging it out. You know, we helped him dig out. But yeah, very stressful situation.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we have definitely seen that type of situation.
Oh my.
Interesting.
So Karl, I think you've answered this in part. And my next question is, on your website, you do mention the Abunden Management Toolbox software. So can you give us a little bit more details as to what that is exactly?
Right. And so the software puts into an online software as a service, get to it through a website, the tools like the one-page business plan, the drag and drop org charts, the structured management meetings, the supervisor tools and training processes, and the learning management system. So those tools are the ones that we use. And so just like you'd have a paper org chart, now we've got an easier to use and shareable org chart online. And then our consulting is about implementing it. It's helping you use these tools in a way that fit the way your company operates so that it can be most effective at helping you keep control of the company, delegate effectively, and scale to the next level. And, you know, when I say we help companies to double their sales, we've seen that many times. I've seen many companies that are able to bring in more sales, but just not actually able to handle those more, you know, those additional sales. You know, if you don't follow up quickly enough, well, you lose, you know, bids. You don't win the bid because you didn't quote soon enough. Or if you get the order, but, you know, you don't deliver on time, you don't get the next order. And these are the types of things that we really focus on. And so, you know, we're not the super sales experts. We work with other people who are super sales experts to help these companies, but we want to try and use our software and our services to help them implement it so they can grow the company to the next level.
Okay, so Karl, we're heading into we're in inflationary times, and it looks like it's going to get worse. So, what would your advice to business owners be, to consolidate or to go for growth, or is that too general a question? Does that depend on the industry?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors. You know, you know, inflation is something we're seeing. I think the labor force, you know, we've got all these boomers retiring, big generation, and we've got the young, you know, 18 to 22-year-olds coming in. And the numbers that I'm seeing is that we've got a 400,000 worker shortfall, you know, a decrease in the size of the workforce of 400,000 people this year.
Wow.
Slightly more next year, and next year for like the whole next decade. So that, I think, is one thing driving the inflation. There's certainly other factors. It's not so simple to point to one thing, but that impact, you know, is going to have a lot of, like you say, Peter, different industries are going to see it play out different. So, you know, there's some situations, maybe a fast food restaurant has ways to, you know, automate or, you know, be more effective with fewer people. And maybe certain manufacturing situations are going to be like that, whereas a home healthcare company may have a lot more difficulty automating or substituting away. And I do think different parts of the country are likely to get impacted differently. the Sun Belt, I think, is still growing. Some of in the U.S., some other parts of the U.S. maybe a little bit less so, and different parts of the world, are impacted very differently. The numbers that I was quoting on the workforce were just the U.S. alone.
Sure, no, that's right. But it's very similar here, and we have an interesting situation here in that statistics say we lost 40,000 jobs in June and another 30,000 in July. It might have been the other way around, I'm not sure, but 70,000 over 2 months, and we are a tenth of the population of your country. However, when I drive around, I see we're hiring signs all over the place, mainly in fast food, as you mentioned. Tim Hortons, our iconic coffee chain, right? But even the Toyota dealer up the road from me, when I go into town, he's looking for a mechanic and other technicians. People I know that with plumbing business say, I can't get plumbers. Another guy can't get electricians. And I'm thinking, we've lost 70,000 jobs in 2 months, and these guys can't find people to work for them. What's going on?
Right. The world is in a big shift. I think the demographics we're seeing. I mean, UK, much of Europe is impacted very significantly. Japan saw it 25 years ago and continues to see the impact today. So inflation. I think supply chains with the last couple of years with COVID have shifted dramatically. So we're bringing a lot of manufacturing, back from, perhaps East Asia where it used to be. So, if you're in certain industries, I do think there are growth opportunities. You have to be diligent about keeping your pricing, protecting your margins with the inflation, which is not something that most of us are used to at this point. Peter, you may recall back in the 80s when inflation was very high. So yeah, it was different back then, right?
Yeah, I know all about high inflation. I was in Zimbabwe for my last time in Africa, so we saw inflation in the millions of percent. We know the effects of inflation. Kathleen, you wanted to ask Karl something else?
Well, over the last couple of years with lockdowns and what have you, could it be that there's a lot of people out there also that have reevaluated what is important in their lives, and things that they were forced to do during the lockdown was to work from home. And once they did that, they realized, gee, I really like that. I really like the flexibility of working from home. Are you noticing these types of changes working with the companies that you work with, that is a challenge that they're having to overcome? People don't want to come into the office anymore. They want that flexibility.
Oh, absolutely. I had lunch with a gentleman he works for a larger organization, and he was saying, he's like, I go into the office maybe once a week, and I like not having to commute. I like being able to spend more time with my family. So, absolutely. And it's a mindset shift for a lot of the companies, the smaller companies. They're like, hadn't even thought about this till a couple of years ago. So yeah, that's a big deal. And, with the kind of shrinking workforce, there's kind of more negotiating power for the workers. So you better adapt or somebody else is going to hire those workers.
Absolutely.
Right.
So what sets Abunden, apart from other business consultants?
Right. I think the breadth of what we're bringing to the table, we've got our business operating system, which is the core of building the management infrastructure. We also bring very deep financial, very deep systems pieces as well. And so just decades of working with these lower middle market businesses in all aspects. And so, every company I've gone into has got a slightly different situation. And it's not always the situation that you kind of think when you walk into the first meeting. It's like, well, thought it was a sales problem, but it turns out, it was, a combination of people and financing. And once we solve them, well, now we have some systems problems we have to address. So it's a lot more about let's look at all the challenges. Again, we'll focus on one or two at a time, and then know when to bring in the experts to actually say, okay, let's, when do we put a patch on it and say, okay, we can survive with a patch on that, and let's go fix a bigger problem. And so that's kind of the what separates us from most organizations that are more specialized.
Mm-hmm. So we touched on the effects of the lockdowns a few minutes ago, but in your experience, what other lessons have businesses learned from the last 2 years of lockdowns? And I mean, I know in the States, the lockdowns have been much more serious in some states like New York and California than where you are, for instance, in Texas or in Florida, and many other states somewhere between the two extremes. So are there other, apart from working from home, are there other important lessons companies have learned from all this?
Well, I think that a number of companies that I've talked to and worked with are seeing the impact of the supply chain disruptions. Yep. And that's still ongoing. Talked to a company a month or so ago, and they were still relying on China for a number of key components in the products that they manufacture. And, China continues to be in lockdown and have all sorts of other, potential issues going on as well. So, I think that is something that even if Houston and Texas and wherever Florida don't see as much of the direct impact of the lockdown, we definitely see some indirect impact as well.
Sure. And it's some impacts that we don't even think about. I was talking to someone yesterday who just bought a new vehicle, and he was told, I can't remember, I think it was a GM, I'm sure he said GM. He was told by the dealer, it's missing one chip because of we all know there's a shortage of chips. So he said, well, the brake's going to work. I said, no, everything works. It had something to do with the Bluetooth connection for his phone. It was a minor issue, but if you want the car, you're going to have to take it without this chip. And in 6 months, when we get the chip, we'll recall it and we'll put the chip in for you. Take it or leave it. And I mean, I don't know about where you are, but here you find it really difficult to get a car with a chip or without a new vehicle at the moment.
We went for about 3 months without a microwave after ours broke because, it just took a long time to get one put in. So, yeah.
It's some amazing ramifications of, and we haven't seen all of them yet. There's more coming that we don't even thought about, I think. Interesting stuff. I've got one that I must ask you, what I call my burning question. And you've had a long experience, and we ask this question of all our successful guests, and you're certainly up in that category. So with your experience of working with many businesses, and you mentioned you've seen some failures as well, do you think there's one mindset or one habit or one characteristic that sets the successful business owner sort of head and shoulders above those who just remain average or who, run their businesses into the ground? Is there a single thing, or is it more than that?
Well, I would, generally say that there are several things that when put together improves your likelihood dramatically. But if I had to pick one, my personal favorite would be adaptability.
Okay. Yes.
And, the world changes whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
And, I think Darwin had a quote, it's not the strong or it's the adaptable that survive.
Survive. Absolutely. That's a good one. Yeah.
Yes, it is actually. And I have one that I always like to ask our guests. And can you walk us through the process you would take with a new client? So tomorrow I called you up, Karl, I'm in need, can you give me a kind of a detail of what it is that you would go through with me? First steps anyways.
Absolutely. Typically, the first thing we do is an assessment, and depending how the introduction comes, sometimes it's a little more formal. Some people, like the reports, other people just want to talk. And, but either way, it's really the same assessment process. We've got a 70-something point kind of checklist, and we're not walking through one by one, but the intent that checklist has got 9 major areas, and we want to kind of evaluate what they think are the priorities among those 9 areas and kind of compare that to what we're seeing and have a conversation about how that matches up. If we're, if we're seeing similar things, are we close enough that you say, yes, this makes sense, or maybe you need a different resource and maybe we can point you in a different direction.
Okay, well, it looks like we're running low on time, Karl. Can you tell our audience how they can contact you?
Absolutely. So you can reach me by email at karl@abunden.com. You can certainly find me on LinkedIn or visit our website at abunden.com.
Excellent.
We will put all that on there. Thank you very much for that, Karl. Good.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being with us today, Karl. We so appreciated having you on the show.
Enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Kathleen, Peter.
And once again, thank you all so very much for tuning in to our show. And until next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.